no confusion, there'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. I am Gabriel Ha-Cohen.
Hi, I'm Sadie Carpenter, and I am grafted into the one root of Judaism.
I don't know what that means, but I think that I'm going to have a problem with it later.
I'm gonna explain it to you.
Okay, because we are here to talk about Sadie's life in the Independent Fundamental Baptist cult. Well, not today, we're not really, but we are here to educate and inform listeners about this cult and to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about cult stuff, but also just interesting religious stuff.
This is going to be a fun episode because there's a little bit of a role reversal where usually I ask Sadie a bunch of questions and then I make grand proclamations about them, whereas this is going to be the other way around, where I'm going to say a bunch of stuff and then Sadie's going to contextualize it, but that's fine.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
So before we get into all of that, I would just like to say to our listeners that the Leaving Eden podcast is a fully viewer-supported podcast. So if you enjoy this content, you can subscribe to our Patreon, where we have bonus content, including very extended show outtakes. So a lot of outtakes from the show on there. But if you don't want to join the Patreon for whatever reason, you can support us in other ways, like recommending this podcast to your family, your friends, your coworkers. And we are trying to grow our audience, raise awareness about this issue, about this cult, and the real danger that the IFB and other cult groups present to society as a whole. So the third thing that you can do, maybe if you like other podcasts, is that maybe suggest to those podcast hosts, send them an email, send them an Instagram DM, Twitter DM. Hey, you guys should get the hosts from Leaving Eden podcast on your podcast. They would be great guests. They're interesting. I think we're interesting. I think you're more interesting than I am, but that's all right.
I think we're fantastic guests.
I think we are too. When we went on Permanent Waves, we did a great job. Shout out to Ray from Permanent Waves and Ben from Permanent Waves. For
Hi,
having us
Waves.
on their show. Hey, Permanent Waves. You guys are great.
Jinx.
Yeah. So the other thing that you can do is you can go and you can join our Facebook group. It's called Eden Exodus.
I don't think we've mentioned this on the show before, but since I'm friends with you and since you mention things that I then go Google and do more research on, my targeted ads on Facebook and Instagram think I'm Jewish. Like, for real. So
I think you're planning a Jewish wedding.
Yeah, they think I'm planning a Jewish wedding. They think I'm Jewish and heavily into subscription boxes because they wanted to send me like an apples and honey subscription box.
Oh, for Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. So, and they think I'm planning a Jewish wedding and all sorts of stuff. But I also get a lot of ads for these birthright trips. But since I am absolutely not Jewish, if I wanted to take a trip to Israel, I would have to pay for it myself. Because I would love to go and totally intend on doing that one day.
Yeah, I mean, I preface this by saying I would not begrudge any Christians who felt like they wanted to visit Israel. And like, in fact, I would say that like if you feel like a spiritual connection to this place for whatever reason, I'd highly recommend that you do it to visit if you have that opportunity. Or like if you're just interested in history and you're not religious, it's a fascinating place. Like it's full of ancient ruins that are remarkably like well preserved. And there's like all sorts of beautiful like old buildings, like ancient old buildings. And like there's a lot of like cool Islamic architecture as well. Like for example, in Jerusalem, if you go and look at like the Dome of the Rock or like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, like the tile work in those buildings is breathtaking. Absolutely beautiful. And I know but I know a lot of Christians and evangelicals especially do go to visit Israel. And I know this because they will often tell me that they have visited Israel immediately after finding out that I am Jewish.
Okay, so wait. So it's literally like, you're Jewish? Oh, that's cool. I went to Israel in 2017. It was super awesome. It's
more along the lines of like, oh, you're Jewish? What do you think of the situation in Israel right now? I went there X number of years ago, right after X conflict. I just want to let you know that I pray for Israel every day. Have you ever read what Mark Twain said about the Jews?
Okay, so I have
So yeah.
I have definitely met that kind of person, and the pray for Israel every day. That's something that I've heard in the evangelical world quite a bit.
In my, like, when I hear somebody say that they quote unquote pray for Israel every day, what I take from that is not that they are per se like praying for Israel to be a prosperous nation that is a nice place to live, or that the conflict going on there that is like the only thing that people really know about that place, that will have a peaceful and auspicious resolution that will be agreeable to almost all parties. Because, like, remember what we talked about last episode with when we were talking about Sarah, like, what these people believe, a lot of them believe, is that Arabs are actually the source of all of the conflict in the world, and that they are the biggest barrier to peace. And so what they're actually praying for when they're saying like, oh, I pray for Israel every day, is for some sort of like ethnic cleansing-esque situation in which like all of the Palestinians and all of the Arabs are removed from the land, and so that it can be a 100% peaceful Jewish state. And then something to do with that is a precursor to the book of Revelations happening, and then the rapture, and then like we talked about. So when a Christian says to me, I pray for Israel every day, because I know what they actually mean by that.
Does that go over well?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if somebody says like comes up, they know one thing about me, and they come up and try to talk about that thing, like to me, like trying to, you know, like if they only know one thing about me, they're like, that's the one thing that I know about you, and I'm going to talk to you about what my preconceived notions about what your opinions about this might be, to try to endear myself to you without actually asking you any questions about yourself other than that. Like, you know, I mean, that's the sort of situation where I'm just like, well, I don't really want to have this person around me, so maybe I'll say something that will put them off a little bit so they won't want to talk to me. Or,
you know, that totally makes sense. And I do hear the phrase pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I think that's from one of the Psalms. But I think you're not wrong that a lot of people that are praying that prayer are praying for the kind of peace that comes with, you know, eradicating everybody except for Jews in that area.
Yeah, and the Christians can come too, and maybe then convert all the Jews to Christianity.
Oh no.
And then okay, yeah. So I mean, but like when you think about like Jerusalem doesn't really need anybody to pray for peace for it. This is just my opinion, because like what Jerusalem's generally a pretty safe and peaceful city. Like, and so that's a population probably about 200,000 more people than Portland, Oregon. But they have less instances of crime, less instances of like violent crime. So maybe people should be praying for peace in Portland instead, because although Portland is like one of the safest major cities in the country, although if these people were also saying like they were praying for peace in Portland, knowing them, they would also be like praying for some sort of like brutal assault on the rights of the people here. And that like all of the anti-police demonstrators that are going on here, that they would all be like shot or arrested or something like that. Yeah.
But no, I don't think if I heard somebody say, oh, I'm praying for peace in Portland, I would like to believe that what they meant was, you know, I'm praying for that ballot measure to pass so that the police have more oversight. Right. And if somebody who says that they pray for peace in Israel or pray for peace in Jerusalem, they might really be talking about, you know, a lasting peace built on mutual respect. But you don't know that. So you feel like if you meet a Christian, they're like, oh, I love Israel so much. And or try to just convert you just like on the spot. That seems to be like your experience with Christians.
Like around in like Portland, Northwest, is like most of the Christians that you meet here are not particularly like the proselytizing type. They'll just be regular people, and then they'll like be like regular people that like go to church or something. It's really more of just a vocal minority that make it seem like Christians just can't hold it together around Jews. They just can't. That like usually like one of three things happens. So the first is that like they go on about like, I love Israel. Aren't Muslims and Arabs the worst? I wish they'd get out of the way. Am I right? Like, you know, like you were saying where they're like, I pray for Israel every day. That's basically what they're saying. They're like, man, I wish those Muslims would just, you know, take a hike. Like which, you know, not great. The second thing and I've talked about this before, is that they'll ask me if I've like, have you heard the good, or have you heard the good news? You know, that's when they're like being, you know, they're really going for it. Or like if they're maybe trying to be a bit more subtle about it, they'll be like, what do you think about Jesus? So
yeah, but I mean, there's outside of our podcast, there's very little reason for JC to cross your mind.
Yeah, so the third thing that they'll do, and I think that this is the most interesting and weird and also like a little comical, is that they will act almost as if I am a figure to be revered, like as if I am somehow a person who needs to be protected and fawned over and like had every need catered to.
See, that seems so awkward. Is this like a because you're one of the chosen people thing?
Well, yeah, like what's the verse in Genesis, right? It says like something like those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you. Yeah.
I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
Is that so?
That's the and yes, I do know that off the top of my head. And yes, I didn't realize I did until it started coming out of my mouth. Apologize.
Like my existence is an opportunity for them to enact really weird superstitions about that.
Oh, I see.
It's never about making me feel happy or comfortable or anything like that. It's always just some sort of like weird performative, like to show, like on their part, to show to God that they are pumping as much kindness and blessing into one of Israel's descendants that they can, so that they can like maximize their own blessings, like their heavenly ROI.
Yeah. So that. I mean, that just sounds awkward.
Oh, it's awkward, but like then like every time it happens, it's just like, oh, this again. Like it's kind of funny.
And yeah, that verse it's the Abrahamic covenant. I don't know, at least that's what we call it. But dude, I can tell you from someone who was formerly on the inside of evangelical Christianity, the views on Israel and on Jewish people as a whole, it can be kind of weird. I
mean, I think it's funny though that this applies to Jews, but that it doesn't apply to Arabs, right? Because Arabs are supposed to be all supposed to be Ishmaelites, right?
Yeah.
And Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn son to his wife's slave Hagar. And therefore, all of the Arabs, all of the Ishmaelites are descended from Abraham. Apparently, they aren't worthy of this blessing, which is kind of weird, but...
Well, I don't think they got a blessing. They got a promise. So Ishmael didn't get a blessing the way that Isaac did. He got a promise that he would be a great nation.
God never blessed white, like the white people. They're like, oh, you guys are going to be a great nation. Did he? Is there a blessing for the Romans?
Well, I think that would go back to the second episode that we ever did, where we talked about Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
Oh, right. Where you guys are like, well, technically, we're from this.
Yeah, you remember that? Okay, but keep in mind the Abrahamic covenant, which we were just talking about, which is the blessing that passes through Abraham to Isaac specifically. That is actually going to come up back on the back end of this episode. So keep that in mind. So I knew someone in the cult who bragged incessantly about having had a Jewish friend in college.
Oof.
Because apparently there was a Jewish dude who went to Hyles Anderson. And apparently they were such good friends that the guy even told them what tribe he was from.
I find this both hilarious and interesting. Hilarious that a Jewish person would decide to go to Hyles Anderson Bible College for whatever reason. Second, because like what? So second, like for a lot of Jewish people, like they don't know what tribe they're from.
So what we're talking about is the book of Genesis. Jacob, who later had his name changed to Israel, has 12 sons. Andrew Lloyd Webber did a musical about it. That's pretty fun. And now I have that stuck in my head. Jacob and Sons. Anyway, the 12 sons. I don't know that
one, but okay.
It's Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Well, so the 12 sons of Jacob, one of them being Joseph, they each go on to father a line of their own descendants. And then that's what people are talking about when they say that the 12 tribes of Israel, it's those 12 sons. And like each one of those sons and his descendants become their own tribe. But they're all descendants of Israel. So that's the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel.
Yeah, Israel was a person whose name was Jacob. Also, his name was Israel.
Yes, and he wrestled with an angel and got his hip thrown out of joint. And he had 2 wives. He's an interesting story. I'm sorry.
2 wives and 2 concubines, and their wives were sisters. Anyway,
I'm sorry. That was off track, but I think he has a cool story.
Like for a lot of Jewish people. So like when they say, "Oh, I'm from this tribe, I'm from that tribe," like which we don't really say. Like we don't really talk about that. Like over the centuries anyway, like literally thousands of years ago, this is what it's all talking about. Like these families all got mixed up with each other, especially like within the Jewish diaspora. And since so many family names had changed over the years, like I mean, there was like laws in different countries in Europe. Like for instance, in Germany, they would have laws that said, okay, well, like the Jewish people have to take like German last names. So like a lot of these people, like a lot of these family names over the years were lost.
If you do happen to know, like what tribe or what 2 tribes your family comes from. So is it not some kind of big intimate secret that you'd only tell a best friend?
No.
Okay.
I mean, for instance, so my Hebrew name, like my Hebrew name is Gabriel Hakon. That's like not the name that it says on my birth certificate but like when I do public stuff, when I do music stuff, when I do this podcast thing, I go by my Hebrew name, which is Gabriel HaKohen. If you meet somebody whose last name is Cohen or whose last name is Khan, or there's other variations like Katzman, so it means that their ancestors were the priests in the temples. And the priests were all descended supposedly from Aaron the prophet, the brother of Moses. And Aaron and Moses were from the tribe of Levi. So in fact, like names like Levi, Levitz, Levinson, Levine. So those are all like surnames that you would hear from like the tribe of Levi. So the same like goes, if you met somebody whose last name was Menashe, that would be somebody from the tribe of Manasseh. Or like, so like the kosher wine Manischewitz, like that was started by a guy whose last name, his family name was Menashevitz. And so like in Slavic languages, that would mean son of Manasseh. So same with like if you met somebody whose name was Rubenstein, then they would probably be from the tribe of Reuben. So it's like not some crazy secret.
So it's not like this guy is like, I must be his best friend because he like took me in a dark corner and whispered what tribe he's from.
No,
Okay.
no, not at all. Like,
because I was taken aback a little bit the first time.
That's weird.
The first time you're like, oh yeah, here's my last name. It's probably this tribe, and I was like, what? We're not that close. Like, what are you doing? Like, how friendly do you think we are, dude?
Like you legitimately thought that that's like a deep dark secret that we don't like. No,
well, I mean, it occurred to me because like I know you as a person that like I can contextualize like, oh, that's not like the body language and like the way that he's behaving right now. So clearly my perception is off, because here's a real fun thing. My knowledge of you as a person trumps the stereotypes that I have in my mind.
Hey, there you go.
Because like me knowing you as a friend and as a person, like that comes first.
You're able to look at people as individuals, not just an amalgamation of attributes, which is a nice thing.
But it did like take me a minute. I was like, oh wait, I need to reevaluate this because like clearly my perception is wrong.
Yeah, so like I'll tell you, like, I mean, it doesn't really mean that much unless you are like a Cohen, and there's like only like so much that really means. But like I'll jokingly tell people who are maybe a little bit too interested in my background, like I'll jokingly tell somebody, like just to troll them if they don't have any idea, that Leonard Cohen, I'll like jokingly tell people, oh yeah, he's my cousin, or that I'm related to the Cohen brothers, or that I'm related to figure skater Sasha Cohen.
Is that fun?
I mean,
I do get asked if I'm related to Karen Carpenter. No, I'm wondering, like, okay, do you think the guy who was all, it's a big secret, I'm not supposed to tell what tribe I'm from, like, was he just wrong? Was he just pulling somebody's leg? Like, what?
I mean, he could have had a sense of humor about it and just been like playing a joke on all these funnies. But like, if you were raised, it's such a weird thing to be like, oh, this is a big secret. Like, I'm sort of like suspecting, like, was this guy like actually Jewish?
I mean, he was ethnically Jewish. I'm sorry, is ethnically Jewish? Is that the correct term?
Because it seems to me like the type of thing where, because like a lot of people just don't even know. And so like, it seems to me like it's the type of thing where like, if you didn't know and you didn't want a lot of people to know that you were talking about it, then, you know, you would like make something up, but you would keep it like a secret. And so like it's like a lie that you would tell to one person, but you tell them not to tell anyone.
No, I'm like fairly sure that he was Jewish. He was just like, he was this Jewish guy who had converted and now he's at Hyles-Anderson.
Converted?
Yeah. So now he's at Hyles-Anderson because he wants to like go out and convert other Jews to the IFB because of Jesus, you know.
Was he like converted to Baptist, or was he like a Jews for Jesus guy?
Well, both, I assume.
So Jews for Jesus, not actually Judaism.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yes, obviously it's not Judaism, but like he's still ethnically Jewish, though.
I mean, you could be ethnically Jewish but not practice the religion.
Yeah, because like this guy wanted to basically be a missionary to other Jewish people.
Oh, that's the worst. They try that too. They'll like send people to, I think I told you about this. I sent you like a tweet that I saw where it was like, my wife successfully sussed out a Jews for Jesus couple that tried to, because she was like, she heard the wife say, I'm so glad that Hashem put you as the head of our household. And she's like,
see, I got the concept though that the Jews for Jesus people are like non-Jewish people, like that just like want to go convert all the Jews. Like, okay, like me, a non-Jewish person, trying to run around and convert you.
That's just you being a mission. No, Jews for Jesus, that's like, I think is specifically like a subset of like Messianic Judaism. So
yes. Okay, so I can tell you that it is because Messianic Judaism is like Judaism, but like, think the Messiah has already come.
Jews for Jesus, or any other form of Messianic Judaism, is not Judaism. Messianic Judaism is a form of Christianity that has appropriated Jewish holidays and customs in order to persuade, or to try to persuade, non-religious ethnic Jews to convert to Christianity by draping it in familiar custom. So Jews for Jesus are not Jews. Messianic Judaism is not Judaism. It is Christianity. Jewish theology is clear on this. So following Jewish religion and theology is mutually exclusive. Like like when I had my phone interview to see if I qualified for my birthright trip, they straight up asked me if I was Messianic. If I had been Messianic and then told them that I was Messianic, they would have told me that I did not qualify for the trip because Messianic Judaism is not Judaism, it is Christianity.
So I feel like there's a possibility that I had some things backwards here. So I had been under the impression that Messianic Judaism as a religious movement or religious group consists of mostly ethnically Jewish people who have, and please excuse my terminology because I know this is, anyway, excuse my terminology, but people who are ethnically Jewish who have seen the light about Jesus being the Messiah. And so they kind of took it upon themselves as like, oh, I'm Jewish and my Messiah is here. Woohoo. So they take on like Jewish holidays and Jewish customs that they've always celebrated, but they've moved the Sabbath to Sunday because that has something to do with Jesus that I can't remember off the top of my head. And then with worshiping Jesus as Messiah, so as the completion of Jewish religion. And then there are also like non-ethnically Jewish people who convert from Christianity to Messianic Judaism and then also take on like Jewish customs, Jewish holidays while worshiping Jesus, etc., etc. Okay, for one thing, I feel like I have the types of people, like the ratio of the types of people backwards.
So before the 19, I don't know about the ratio of the types of people who are in. I don't know. I don't generally associate with messianic types because it's just too weird for me. So but the history before the 1960s, Jews who converted to Christianity were expected to give up their Jewish culture. In the 1960s, so like we talked about earlier, with the same sort of movement that propelled First Baptist Church, the IFB and whatever, into becoming a mega church, and the same movement that made Jerry Falwell and Billy Graham into national like superstar pastors, like household names. So it brought a lot of people who were otherwise non-religious to Christianity. Among some of these people were people who were raised with Jewish traditions, but were essentially atheist or secular or whatever. And we'll get into this later, but because like Jewish atheism is its own sort of like interesting like cultural tradition that dates back a long time. But essentially, like a lot of it was ethnic Jews who got dragged into the evangelical movement and then got joined by regular Christians. So you end up with like a blend, like a smattering of ethnic Jews who converted to Christianity, and then a bunch of evangelicals who think that Judaism is sort of like neato. Like, oh, that's interesting.
I just think they're neat.
Yeah, who don't want to, but they don't want to give up on their promised mansion on Hallelujah Street in heaven.
Oh, okay. So number one, I had no idea that this was so recent.
They're building him a mansion on Hallelujah Street. Is that how the song goes? I think
that was close. And I really, I don't know why, but hearing you quote IFB song lyrics is honestly just so amusing to me.
Yeah, but anyway, like, so Messianic Judaism, as we see it today, is less than 100 years old. And it's essentially born out of like a culture clash and born out of like cognitive dissonance.
So do you think that Messianic Judaism is specifically a result of the evangelical views on Judaism and Jewish people? Like, you know, like the whole idea about like Jews have a special relationship with God. Like, is this a result of that?
I can't really say. Like, what I can say is that, like, growing up not Christian, you really like see the stark difference between how, at least in America, like how Christians are treated institutionally in this country as opposed to like any other religion. So for instance, if you are Jewish and you wish to obey Jewish dietary laws, maybe not strictly, but you do, for instance, as I do, where you don't eat pork or shellfish, and I don't mix meat with dairy. But like, I haven't got like separate fridges, separate dishes, all that stuff. Like, you are almost always treated as if any dietary restriction that you may have is an inconvenience. It's sort of like, you know, going around, if you're like a vegetarian or a vegan, and everywhere that you go is like, oh, you're one of those things. Well, here's like half a bowl of iceberg lettuce. Like, it's like being treated like that. So
it's like being a vegetarian in the Deep South is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect example. Like, or like holidays are another example. So like Christians never have to worry about getting their holidays off from work because Christmas is Christmas and Easter always falls on a Sunday. But if you're Jewish, I mean, like when I was in college, I would tell my professors, like, I can't go to class today and then a week from Wednesday because it's Rosh Hashanah and then it's Yom Kippur. And those are really important Jewish holidays. Those are like most important Jewish holidays, two of the most important Jewish holidays. And they would respond to me by saying something like, oh, well, you only have 2 absences before it negatively affects your grade. And every absence you have after that is going to knock 10% off your grade. Like, and I'm not going to let you make excuses, is like the response that I would get.
Ugh.
So like one time I had a boss tell me like, well, if a holiday was so important, then they would make it on the same day every year so that you could get it off.
Okay. So the first one is just like plain rude and inappropriate. But the second one, like they would just make it on the same day every year. I'm sorry. Does that get, okay. Number one. Okay. Easter is not remotely on the same day every year.
Yeah, but Easter's always on a Sunday. So it's not something you have to worry about. Like if you're working a job that's like a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, you never have to worry about having Easter off.
Okay, yeah, but you know what's not on the same day every year? Chinese New Year.
Yeah, but you celebrate Chinese New Year at night, right?
I mean, I don't know, but it's an extremely important holiday to what, like 1 billion people?
1 billion people. That's true. We do. I don't know. I don't know a lot about Chinese New Year.
I mean, that just makes me mad because I feel like all of that is so rude and unnecessary. Okay, my experience in liberal, non-religious Portland, Oregon, I have never had an issue. Like, usually based on, depending on what my work schedule is, I usually either need to come into work an hour late or leave work an hour early to make it to Ash Wednesday services.
Oh, right. That's the one where they like Simba you on the forehead with.
Yes. And I think I came to work with my smudge on this year, but I might have.
I remember that because it was before the quarantine.
It was right before quarantine. Did I go to work with it on, or did I go to services after work? Do you remember?
You had it on when you showed up for work that day.
Okay, because I didn't remember. I couldn't remember which one I did. But no. So we're in Portland. It's like a secular, non-religious place. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm coming into work an hour late on Wednesday because I have to go to mass and get my smudge. And nobody bats an eye about it. And nobody cares that I'm wearing a smudge on my head all day at work. And that's like a totally non-essential, like, that is not nearly as important as like Rosh Hashanah. Like, it's not like that is more on par with like Easter or Christmas. Ash Wednesday is not one of those. It's like totally non-essential. It's completely optional. It's just a holiday. Like, it's particularly meaningful for me in like my personal faith. I can just be like, oh yeah, I'm coming in an hour late and I'm going to walk around with a smudge on my head all day. You're my employer. You can't discriminate against me religiously. See you an hour late on Wednesday. Bye. And like, I can just do that. And the fact that you can't get off work for like your Christmas level holidays, that gets tired. It gets my blood pressure up a little bit.
It depends on your employer. But like, I mean, if you're Jewish and you have worked for like a professional sort of job for a number of years that was not like a specifically like a Jewish organization, there is a 100% chance that you have had a mandatory work meeting scheduled on a Jewish holiday and then were treated like you were a stick in the mud or like an inconvenience when you asked your boss to change it or you asked to be excused. But it's like one of those situations where like, if like there's a meeting, you know, like if you have a professional job and there's a meeting, maybe it's like an important meeting where decisions are being made. And if you're not there, then you're not making the decisions and so that's going to negatively affect you professionally. You're not going to have your input. That's going to negatively affect you professionally. I know that there's like a sort of negative stereotype out there about Jews giving preferential treatment to like each other in professional situations. But really what's going on here is that like when we get into positions of power, we see it as like a duty to make sure that the door stays open, you know, and to like protect each other from people that we know are not going to have our best interests. Like I was talking, like, so the cultural and societal like pull and bias, like I'm going to connect this back to Messianic Judaism really quick because we kind of got off track. Like the cultural and societal pull and like bias that there is in the academic world towards Christianity and Christian culture, at least, is very strong. Like, and this is in 2020 when things are more accepted than they used to be. I can only imagine that like 50, 60 years ago when this stuff was really going, like when this evangelical movement was really like getting off the ground, it would have been less accepted. The pull to assimilate customs, it's still strong. So when we're talking about the pull that Christianity has, and why, like, you can see why Messianic Judaism would be appealing, because essentially what this is becoming a Christian, but it makes it a lot of times easier than having to constantly deal with being seen as an outsider.
So I grew up with this perception of Jews as like, oh, those poor people. You know, all the signs are right in front of them that they can't see that Jesus was the Messiah. Like, they waited 20 centuries for the Messiah, but they missed him. And it's only the Messianics that are fulfilling God's covenant with the Jews. So, I mean, I figure there's probably something you want to say about.
It only takes a basic look at this issue to really see, like, what the problem with this is. And I'm going to start with like the concept of the Messiah itself, because like you grew up, you like Christian, like, but like hardcore Christian. So like their view, like you've basically been told, oh, well, there was X, Y, and Z prophecy that was put into this book, and why didn't they see it? Like, now that we accept Jesus, we can look back at these books and say, oh, like, look, this was talking about Jesus, this was talking about, like, we got none of that. In Judaism, like, the Messiah is going to be basically a great king who will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem and usher in the messianic age, and then there's going to be peace. So there's nothing in there about him being the literal son of God. There's nothing in there about him being like half man, half God. There's nothing in there about him being able to perform miracles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just like a human dude.
Human guy.
Human guy. No virgin birth? Like, none of that miraculous, like, no, like, the 7 major miracles?
No. Like, he's just like a guy. He's like a person, like King David or King Saul, like the King Solomon. So the Jewish concept of the Messiah looks absolutely nothing like how Christians describe Jesus. Like, there's all sorts of weird retconning that they do to make Jesus into the Messiah. Like, if you look at the old, like,
we're going to do messianic prophecies at some point, because Christians claim about 400, I think, different prophecies. There's like, okay, there's even stuff like in the Song of Songs. Some of the ways that the characters are described is taken as a messianic prophecy, because the way the wording is, oh, well, you know, if you interpret this specific phrase a specific way, then that prophesies this or whatever. But we're going to get into that in more detail. But a lot of it is kind of like, you can't necessarily read just the Old Testament and be like, oh yeah, this is prophesying Jesus. Like, you have to have the New Testament and then read it back and go, oh, well, this could be a prophecy. Well, this could be a prophecy.
Like, when I compare it to the Star Wars sequel, where they had to, like,
it's like a time travel paradox.
I'm going to bring up something that we talked about briefly in the episode where we talked about all of the different Christian denominations.
Okay, go for it.
I think towards the end of that episode, I said something like that Christianity was never a religion that was intended for the Jews. The books which Christians refer to as the New Testament are all written in Greek. And the reason for this is because they were written to appeal to the Romans. If you are a person like me who does not accept the divinity of Jesus, you have to look at Christianity and why this isn't how Christianity spread, like, early in its years. So we've already covered this idea that the idea that a half man, half God who performs miracles is impossible in Judaism. But for Romans, maybe not so much. Like, a few things about that. So Romans often adopted the gods of other cultures into their own culture, which is why, so they essentially worshipped Greek gods, although they had different names for them. So, like, Zeus became Jupiter, like Poseidon became Neptune, and so on. The Romans already viewed their emperor, like the Roman emperor, like Julius Caesar, you know, or whoever the emperor was. They already viewed this figure as a half man, half God type guy. So a Christ-like deity, king, was an idea that they were used to. So if you look at life under this empire, it was very much a polytheistic culture. Every village, every town you would go to, or like every, you know, region within the empire, they would have a different god that they worshipped, like, for different reasons. So, like, say you were an early missionary and you were going out to spread Christianity, you could go to a town which accepts the existence of other gods, and they'd have like their own god, and say that they worshipped Poseidon or whatever. That was their god for that town, because they were by the water. You'd say, oh, well, you guys worship Poseidon? This is my god. He did X, Y, and Z. And he sent his son, Jesus, to earth to save all of mankind. And they'd be like, oh, wow, that God's pretty cool. I guess we better worship that one too. He sounds like a pretty powerful God. So, like, you could convert them to worshiping your God, and maybe they wouldn't resist so much because their culture was already like, oh, well, there are multiple gods. These are the ones that we worship in this village. Other people worship different ones. That's fine. Christianity was essentially a religion that was made to spread throughout the Roman Empire. And eventually, like, it became the official religion of the empire. So it was never meant as a religion that was for the Jews. It was never meant for us. That's why we don't follow it, because it is wholly incompatible with our existing beliefs. even though they use all of our books.
So one quick correction. Christians do not believe that Jesus was half man, half God. Christians believe that Jesus was 100% human and 100% God concurrently, down to the DNA. Like, to you, that's a tiny detail. To Christians, that is a really big freaking deal. So I had to make that correction. Like, my reaction, so back to the like hashtag not all Christians thing, my reaction was definitely like, my emotional reaction is to be triggered or offended about you saying that whole piece about the Greek and the Greco-Roman gods. But like, I can't, because there is a literal scripture account of that exact story that you just told. Like, I can point you to a scripture where it happened.
Well, like, I mean, I just want to say to everybody, I'm not here to tell you, oh, your religion's false. I'm not here to tell you that like you shouldn't believe it, or that you should stop going to church, or that I just want you to understand why Jewish people aren't going to see Jesus as the Messiah, and why we aren't going to convert to Christianity. And like, there's no use in trying to do it. Maybe you'll get like one or two if you put like all of your resources into it, but like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and it goes back to the idea of like Christianity is the default. And that's something that American Christians experience regardless of being raised in a cult or not raised in a cult. I did want to tell you the story real quick that I was speaking about. It's in Acts, Book of Acts, chapter 17. So Paul gets to Athens, and he sees that they have all these different temples to different gods. Like, they have a temple to Athena, they have a temple to Dionysus, and they have a temple to all these other gods. And they have this one extra temple, and it's like a really nice temple, and it says it's to the unknown god. So basically, the Athenians are like covering their butts in case there is one more, like, more powerful god that they don't know about and don't have a temple to. Very smart. Like, this is logical. This makes sense.
And get out of jail free.
Get out of jail free temple. So Paul gets
You
up.
didn't build a temple to me. Well, technically I did.
I did.
I just didn't know you.
It's to whatever god I didn't know about.
You didn't say my name. But we're not allowed to say your name.
Yeah.
There you go.
See?
Can't send me to hell. Haha.
It's insurance.
Got in on a technicality.
So Paul gets up in the public square and he tells the Athenians, and this is really smart of him. He gets up and he tells the Athenians, like, oh, hey, I found the unknown God. It's the Jewish God, and actually also his son, Jesus, who is the Messiah.
They're like, oh, interesting.
And they were like, oh, that's the unknown God. Are you sure? And Paul was like, yeah, I'm absolutely sure. He knocked me off a horse one time. And the Athenians, we'll get to that. And the Athenians are like, really? You found the unknown God? Cool. We worship him now. So when you say that Christianity was spread by using the current gods already in place, like I said, it makes me feel defensive. It really does. But my own scripture tells a story about that happening. So I really can't fight it. And I did want to point out, like, having your beliefs questioned or just like straight up discounted by another person, like, that can be unsettling. That can put you on edge a little bit, no matter how open-minded you are, especially if you are an American Christian. And you know, people who are going to challenge those beliefs do need to understand that when we feel those feelings of defensiveness, that defensiveness is coming from years of being told that your religion is the baseline, is the default, and always having been treated like that.
I think it's funny that you like your guys' attitude toward questioning. Christians are like, oh, how dare you question? Like, you're Jewish, like, you question it. They're like, oh, well, this again. Like, the rabbi's like, oh, I don't deal with this 8 times a day. Somebody coming in and asking me.
Well, yeah, but if you and I are gonna have this conversation, like, I need to be aware that it comes naturally to you to just be willing to, oh yeah, why? To just question everything. And you need to be aware that that when you respond that way, it does make me feel defensive. Well, that doesn't mean I'm going to react in a rude way. That doesn't mean, that you're going, it certainly doesn't mean that you're trying to be rude or hurt my feelings if you question something.
And that kind of brings me to another, you'll bear with me here. So Judaism is the religion, the rituals, the traditions that are commanded of the descendants of Jacob for the nation of Israel. We do not go out of our way to bring into our tradition other people, try to bring you in. So Christianity, on the other hand, many branches, not all branches, many branches, they do seek to evangelize. Jews do not have a concept of hell as it exists for Christians. We do not have the same concept of heaven as it exists for Christians. There is no like stakes. There is no mortal peril if somebody goes their life without accepting our God as the one true God. That's like a fundamental difference that like people need to understand. So to me, this makes these denominations of Christianity that put the focus on evangelism, that put the focus on quote unquote soul winning, into denominations that exist out of aggression. Personally, I see the act of evangelism as an act of aggression. Like, as much as I like laugh in like annoyance about the fact that I had to, you know, take the mezuzah down from my door, or, you know, to make people less likely to try to proselytize.
Well, I was hoping that would come up about how there's no heaven or hell in Judaism.
So how did you react when you found that out? When you're like,
oh, so you want to know how I found out?
How?
Orange is the new black.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, and you're just like, wait, what? I have to look this up.
There's an episode early. It's in one of the early seasons where somebody decides to convert. So she wants, I believe she wants to convert to get kosher meals in jail.
Oh, because the kosher meals are better.
Right, because kosher meals are better. But then she finds real meaning within this conversion process. Yeah, it's and it turns into this very sweet story where and I can't remember which character because I've been meaning to rewatch that, and I probably should do that with the rest of my.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that season. I only watched the first 2 seasons.
See, I kind of want to start over again because I think I've seen the first three and a half.
Okay.
But anyway, no, like this character just finds like actual peace and actual happiness. And one of the big draws to her about converting is that there's no heaven or hell. And she feels like that gives her the space to live more purely because she's not focused on like, oh, is this action going to affect my eternal consequences? It's just like, how does this action affect me and the people around me?
How did you react when you found that? Was that like mind blowing for you where you're just like, wait, what?
It was. And I just thought it was a really lovely concept because at the point where I currently am, and I think this is not what I'm not making a statement of what I'm going to believe for the rest of my life because who the hell knows? No pun intended. But at the point where I currently am, I don't believe in heaven or hell as a literal place. Absolutely believe that heaven and hell are real, but are they physical places? No. Are they literal? No. It's a state of mind, or it's an experience.
Yeah, and so for us, it's not that like heaven doesn't exist, but like heaven isn't some place where you go when you die if you're good, and then you get a big mansion in the swimming pool and like every Ferrari in the driveway.
Is it eternal life?
Yeah, and the angels have violins that they use to play Back That Ass Up at the club every night. Like,
but like, is heaven eternal life?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Like, there's much debate on the topic. Like, if you read from different scholars and philosophers, they'll all say different things.
I believe in eternal life, as in like your consciousness or your soul. Like that there is something after being alive and breathing on Earth, but I don't see it as a place that you go or a timeline that you live out. I don't see it like that. I just believe that I just don't believe that your consciousness is completely erased when you die. I believe that there's a good outcome or a bad outcome depending on how you lived your life.
Yeah, but like, so that's an important thing because like this threat of eternal punishment and like torture is how the IFB keeps people in, right? Like this is another thing that I want to say because like I've heard so many people say like, oh, all religions are the same. Do what we say and you'll get to heaven, and if not, you'll go to hell. Like that's what I hear at least from very uninformed liberal atheist types whose exposure to religion is essentially how they see the political influence of the religious right and like evangelical Christianity. in America. So like they assume that all religions are roughly the same as Christianity, and that all Christianity is pretty much the right-wing evangelism that's so prevalent here in America. And I can see how this would definitely warp somebody's view. Like, especially when it comes to foreign conflicts and sectarian violence, when like if it's between like Jews and Muslims in Israel and Palestine, or if it's like between Shiite and Sunni Muslims in Iraq, or if it's between like Catholics and Protestants in Ireland and like Northern Ireland. So I really don't like to talk about the political situation in Israel publicly, because while I personally have my own opinions about it, and my opinions are no doubt influenced by my Jewish identity, I don't feel as if I have truly studied this foreign conflict in a way that would allow me to know enough to decide what I think the best way of sorting it all out is. It hasn't ever stopped anybody before from giving their opinion, even if it was like terribly uninformed. But this is just like another reason why it irks me so much when evangelicals whose only knowledge of this conflict is basically right-wing, like Muslim-hating propaganda, or like left-wing type people whose only knowledge of this conflict is from Instagram infographics that are produced by Hamas apologists that are like just spouting like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and like they want to talk to me about this. Like, it's so complicated that even if I did understand it enough to like explain it to people, I wouldn't be able to convey the information about like why they're wrong well enough to be able to break people's prejudices about it. And so like I certainly don't have the mental and spiritual energy to explain people over and over and over and over and over again like I'm asked to. Like
yeah, I think that's a great analogy, because religion is complicated because people are complicated, and because culture and history are complicated. And it's never going to be constructive to reduce someone's religion to your very limited understanding of it. And like when we choose to do that, do we just invite conflict?
It's like equating all religions is like, it's like saying that all people who are in a marginalized class or have a marginalized identity would understand each other's struggle. Like, I am never going to understand what it's like to be a black person or what it's like to be a transgender person or somebody like that and face that sort of discrimination. But those people, like, their head would spin if they found out all of the weird places that anti-Semitism appears where like they don't even expect it and you wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it.
Right. It's not we face the same discrimination.
No, it's all different.
It's just like, that there are amounts of discrimination that we both face. And I mean, and that's the thing about privilege that I'm not going to get into because we don't really have time. Privilege is not an on and off switch. Privilege is a scale, and it's really more of a 3D model.
People treat it like that though, because people it's just like heaven and hell. People see heaven and hell as like a binary. You're either privileged or you're not. You're either this or you're that.
And like, privilege being binary, just like, okay, as a white middle class, well educated, bisexual, feminine person, like it really gets to me.
Where do you sit on are you over 8 points? Then you're,
Right. Because it's like in a lot of areas, I'm very privileged, but that absolutely does not mean I've never been discriminated against.
I don't know.
Anyway, I've heard from evangelicals and honestly from a lot of white people in general, they kind of just perceive that anti-Semitism is over.
Yeah.
Especially because we have dog whistles like pro-Israel that are just thrown around in politics and everywhere else.
Yeah, so the fun thing about anti-Semitism is that it's like it comes a lot of it comes from the right, a lot of it comes from the left too. Like politically speaking, it comes from the right, it comes from the left. That's not up for debate. But just think back to the racism episode, like episode 2, where we talked about when you are told something that makes you uncomfortable. And if you're told that something you're doing is racist, you should listen to it, think about what you're hearing and work to change that rather than put the guards up, circle the wagons, and or like around your statement and your perspective just to intentionally prevent yourself from changing. So same thing here. But what I want to say is that So anti-Semitism is a clear and present danger to the safety of Jewish people in the United States and around the world, but I'm talking about the United States specifically, and it comes from right-wing and left-wing sources, both of those sources. So on the political right, they will act with willful blindness to serious anti-Semitism and violence that comes from the political right. On the political left, they will act with willful blindness to anti-Semitism that comes from the political left. They will point fingers at each other and they will leave us out to dry. They are not allies to Jews because they will turn a blind eye to violence against us unless it is politically advantageous for them to talk about it. On the right, it is very clear and very obvious where this anti-Semitism appears. It appears when mainstream Republican Party, right-wing Republican Party, turns a blind eye to white nationalists and white supremacists, and they use the quote-unquote "we support Israel" line as a cover. And then they accept into their midst people who spew anti-Semitic conspiracy theories like QAnon, that whole thing, which harkens back to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is like the stairway to heaven of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Like, I mean, that's just one that I just don't have time to get into, but it's influenced violence against Jews for more than a century. And like, they'll throw out the name George Soros as a left-wing boogeyman, fully knowing that he is the centerpiece to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have stoked violence against Jews for years and years and years. So we see this in Charlottesville when white supremacists were marching and chanting and they were saying Jews will not replace us. And the president only was like very half-hearted in condemning them. I won't say that, he didn't condemn them at all, because people on the right will be like, well, yes, he did, blah, 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 blah. Like, he was very half-hearted in condemning them. We saw this at the mass shooting at the synagogue in Poway like 2 years ago, when the right wing wants to be racist and anti-Semitic. They're not discreet about it.
Yeah, and those code words, by the way, that's something that I've heard you mention quite a bit off air.
Oh yeah, it's all coded.
Well, because so many people will use them without knowing. Like, okay, for example, so I've heard many, many conspiracy theories about George Soros. I had no idea he was Jewish until you told me. And I was like, what? He's what?
Yeah.
No, that was an example that really stuck out to me about how
it's all about, he's going to try to do New World Order.
But like, I had no idea he was Jewish.
Yeah.
So this can be baked into the way that we think and the ways that we speak. And it can be so much more subtle. Like, it's more subtle than, certain Shakespeare characters.
Yeah. So, I mean, have you read The Merchant of Venice?
Dude, I was in The Merchant of Venice.
So Shylock is still a slur that's used for Jews.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? This is a place where I can say that I can relate to the struggle of transgender people, because like, if you look at J.K. Rowling's recent quite disgusting and disappointing comments about transgender people, I think that I can identify with having an author whose work I greatly admire say hateful things about me.
Okay, well, you know what? I can accept that.
Oh, also, that reminds me, in theater class, my junior year of high school, in theater class, I had my theater teacher was having us all do Shakespeare scenes, and one of my classmates was Jewish and had him play Shylock in The Merchant of Venice in the scene where I'm sorry, that's some racist. That's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like cringy or straight up racist, depending on what scene.
Yeah. No, it was the one at the end where it was like where
they take their pound of flesh back.
Yeah, where they're just like, oh, he's taking the pound of flesh, and then what's her name, Portia?
Yeah,
Portia is like, I'm gonna like. They borrowed money from this guy, and then they straight up didn't pay him back, and he's just like, "Fuck you, pay me." Like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, you can't just take money from me. And they're just like, well, you don't get the money, and you don't get the like. He's like, what am I supposed to do? He's trying to run a business here. I'm sympathetic to okay, you know what? It's gonna be trending. Gabrielle Hacohen is a Shylock sympathizer, which is like imagine that, like that's a racist hashtag. But then I'd report it to Twitter, and they'd be like, nah, sorry, nothing we can do about that. Anti-Semitism isn't a serious problem on our platform at all.
See, that is exactly okay, dude. That's the next place that I was going to go with this, because I think that a lot of leftists and liberals, like either the opinion is like, oh, anti-Semitism, okay, like that's just like a few crazy people on the right, or it's like, oh, well, that's just a thing of the past, like, oh yeah, well, okay, Shakespeare was okay, well, whatever, well, you know, Shakespeare had a lot of personal issues, and it probably was like four dudes anyway. I think for the people on the left, like, it's easy to excuse, like, because that's like the excuses that you hear. It's like, oh, it's just a few right-wing crazy people. This isn't something that we really have to deal with.
Yeah, well, left-wing anti-Semitism is much better disguised, because they'll usually, like, things that they'll usually say, they'll be like, oh, I'm criticizing Israel, when actually they're just like spewing hateful anti-Semitic tropes and racist stereotypes. Okay,
so like political statements, but like there's a stereotype behind it.
So in the United States, people have a tendency to look at every sort of disenfranchisement, marginalization, and discrimination through the lens of anti-Black racism. And there is a very good reason for this. So throughout the history of the United States, the most consistent and prevalent embodiment of general like hate and bigotry has been against Black people. I don't think that's controversial to say. The most prominent and historically contentious periods of social change in this country are centered around the fight against anti-Black racism. So with the Civil War in the 19th century, with the civil rights movement in the 20th century, and with what we are seeing today with regards to Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, all of these protests that are going on today. This is what we are taught about in schools from a young age, and rightly so. However, like we were saying earlier, the struggles of Black people in this country with slavery, with Jim Crow, with police violence, they are not necessarily applicable to other forms of discrimination. So when somebody says something to me like, I identify with the struggle of Jewish people against anti-Semitism because I have experienced my own form of discrimination, or because we learned about the Holocaust in school. When somebody says that to me, I am almost always skeptical for a few reasons. So first, like, there is a huge difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism. And I'm generalizing here, but like, anti-Black racism has a tendency to be brash. It has a tendency to be overt. Like, the racist stereotypes against Black people is that they're stupid, that they are lazy, that they're, physically violent, and that they're dangerous and dirty. That's what, racism against Black people usually looks like. That's what the narratives are. And so while anti-Black racism has prevented a large portion of this country's Black population from generating lasting wealth, anti-Semitic racist stereotypes are that we are rich and that we are successful because we lied and cheated our way into getting there. So it's not that we're physically violent, it's that we operate behind the scenes as like puppet masters, as that we are influencing others to be violent in like a cold, calculated manner in order to gain further control, in order to gain further power. Anti-Semitism is something that is secretive, it is shadowy, it is morphing, it is changing, and it is fueled by conspiracy and lies and paranoia. And it uses, innocuous sounding words that any well-meaning person could fall into the habit of using if they didn't know any better. Now, the reason that for this is that the only meaningful way, I should say, that anti-Semitism is taught about in American schools is through the lens of the Holocaust. But if you look at American Jews, far more of our families came to this country between the years of 1850 and 1920 than came following or to escape the Second World War in Nazi Germany. Like, anti-Semitism predates the Holocaust by thousands of years. And people just don't seem to recognize this. So when somebody says to me that they are anti-racist, to me, that is not a guarantee that they're not anti-Semitic. Like this, so no, I know I mentioned this when I was talking about Israel publicly, but like, I don't like talking about Israel publicly. or at least like my opinion about the political situation. And so this is right here, one of the only times on the podcast that I will bring up this messy situation, this political situation that's over there, because I know that anything that I say about this, no matter what it is that I say, is going to be seen as highly controversial by a lot of people. I have personally dealt, like, and this is just me. I'm not saying that that it isn't different for different people, but I personally have dealt with more anti-Semitism relating to how left-wing people talk about Israel than I have personally dealt with coming from right-wing people like neo-Nazis and the like.
I certainly want to be corrected if I'm off base with either my terminology or my concepts here. But I feel like talking about politics in the country of Israel is where a lot of people tend to cross a line, because Israel is a country in the geopolitical sense, but it feels impossible to talk about Israel as a place, as a political force, without talking about Jews in particular. I think people, because it is a country that is made up of a group that is also an ethnic and religious group, I think that makes it complicated for people to talk about.
Very complicated. So I'm going to say something just to clarify for anybody listening who's seething right now. Yes, you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Yes, it is possible to do. I personally have a lot of my own criticisms about Israel and their government and what's going on over there. However, the vast majority of people who identify as anti-racist do not know enough about anti-Semitism to be able to criticize Israel without invoking anti-Semitic tropes. Criticizing Israel and invoking anti-Semitic tropes and narratives are not mutually exclusive. So saying that you are, quote unquote, just criticizing Israel doesn't mean that what you are saying is not anti-Semitic. So what you have to understand listening to this is that one of the most quintessential forms of anti-Semitism is saying that Jewish money has undue influence on the political system, or that that politicians are bought and paid for with Jewish money in order to support Jewish political interests. But left-wing people who I see publicly identifying themselves on social media as anti-racist defended this to the hilt. And then they went on that whole, oh, it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. You guys are just crying anti-Semitism in order to silence people thing, like, which is a whole other bag of worms, which I have no interest in unpacking here and now. But people who are willing to but people who are maybe not so adamantly left-wing, but fairly liberal, they didn't get involved. They did not call out the anti-Semitism where it was so clearly. They just ignored it.
If I could just break in for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
What you said about you guys are just crying anti-Semitism to silence people.
Yes.
Okay, listen. If that was said, oh, you're just crying feminism to silence people, or you're just claiming this is racist against Black people to silence people. If somebody said that, they'd be so canceled.
Yeah, stop policing my speech. I'm right. I'm saying
it's just putting a different group of marginalized people in that sentence really kind of made it stick out to me quite a bit.
But that's something that I literally I see that said all the time. So if you're actually anti-racist, you will condemn anti-Semites not just when it benefits you politically. If you're a left-wing sort of person and you're invoking the most famous act of anti-Semitism in history, the Holocaust, as people do, people are like, this is like the Holocaust. All the time I see it on social media, people posting these infographics talking about, oh, this is just like the Holocaust. If you are comparing the modern Republican Party to, and the modern right wing to Nazis, you had better be willing to stand up against anti-Semitism when it is within your own ranks. Or you are nothing better than just some fake woke opportunist looking for clout on Twitter among progressive circles, and I have no time for your garbage takes about these issues. Ironically, this is just another example of something that the right wing will glom onto and then use as the shield to cover their, and point fingers and be like, we're not the anti-Semitic. not take responsibility for their share of it that's so prevalent. And like, I just want to say that after having said that, I'm absolutely not trying to say that left-wing anti-Semitism is worse or more dangerous than right-wing anti-Semitism. I'm just like spent more time talking about left-wing anti-Semitism because it is more difficult to identify and more difficult to explain, even though it's less obvious.
No, I feel like that's fine, because here's my thought about this. This is primarily a podcast about cults, and specifically the IFB cult. But two things. Number one, the IFB and their relationship with Jewish culture and Jewish people is a little bit unique. And that does spark this conversation, the way we approach this conversation is still influenced by the IFB and how they view Jewish people. Furthermore, you hear people say things like all religions are cults. And well, clearly neither one of us believe that that's accurate. But I do think that the popular perception of all religion being somehow cultic, I think that gives us a space within our podcast to talk about broader topics within the world of religion and culture. And I honestly, it's kind of nice to not talk about my own trauma for an episode. It's kind of refreshing.
So don't worry about that, because I'll make sure that next week's episode is as traumatic as possible.
You probably don't have to do that, because we literally just talked about Jack Scopp a few weeks ago.
Well, the episode that we're about to put out, because we're a few weeks behind, I'm ending the episode. In the edit, I end the episode with a 3-minute long Jack Scopp sermon about how much he hates women.
I was there.
Sure, you were in the room for that one, so the recording
I
can't
think
be
I
as
was,
bad.
yeah. But no, unless you want an entire episode talking about my Scopp specific nightmares, which I do have.
Hey, Gavriel here. If you enjoy the Leaving Eden podcast, head over to our Facebook group, Eden Exodus, where you can talk to other fans, ask us questions, and share memes. That's facebook.com/Eden Exodus. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden Podcast, and you'll get access to extended and uncensored episodes. You can also support our show by recommending it to your family and your friends. The Leaving Eden Podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. And now, back to the show.
So it seems like Jews and Judaism occupy this weird space in the Christian consciousness where they're either hated or sort of fetishized, or it seems to me like kind of both of those at the same time. And I know that fetishize it's a different word, but I'm speaking about the way that a lot of Christians still believe that the Jewish people are God's chosen people, even believing that a prayer from a Jewish person has more power than that of a non-Jewish Christian person.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think fetishize is definitely an appropriate word, but like, welcome to being Jewish, because like, when the Christians love you, they still hate you, just a little bit.
That answer to prayer. See, that's why I always say that if somebody wants to pray for me and they're not praying within my specific religious tradition, they should just go on ahead and pray for me, because I'll take any positive energy. If you want to pray to me to a God that's not my God, you go ahead.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I don't care. But as far as the word fetish, I think that carries like a more sexual connotation when we use it in everyday vocabulary. The connotation that I'm using is that of something magical, something mystical, or powerful or potent. And I think that is the correct usage of the correct word. For when we see Christians co-opting Jewish traditions, like Seders, like mezuzah, and I just know, okay, I know there's something you want to say about that.
So, like, this goes out to all of the Christians listening. If you are invited to a Jewish person's Seder, their Passover celebration, you should go if you want to. That's perfectly fine. To all of the Christians listening, you should not, for any reason, be having your own Passover Seders in Christian tradition. This is an appropriation of Jewish culture. I have heard of Messianic Seders where they talk about Jesus, and I've heard of Christians having their own Seders, but this here is a distinctly Jewish tradition. And it is a Jewish tradition that was not started until after Jesus had already died. So you can't say that, oh, well, this is something from before Jesus, so this is something that we incorporated. No, this is something that
Okay, but I always thought that Seder is what Jesus was doing with his disciples the night before he was crucified. Like shortly before Passover, he's having a meal with it. Was that really a tradition that started after Jesus?
Scholars have dated the first Seder, the first Passover Seder, to slightly before, slightly after the year 70 CE. So this story that, like, I believe it as well because I'd heard it so many times, but this story, like, I looked into it. It is in fact a lie. I'm sure that, you know, maybe Jesus attended some sort of celebration of the holiday of Pesach, but he did not attend a Passover Seder as we know it today. This tradition did not exist at the time when he was alive. It did not exist until decades after his death.
Oh, so it was a Passover meal, but it wasn't like the specific ritual or tradition that people do now.
I don't know. I mean, it could have been. Who knows? I mean, it's just something that they say that oh, well, they say, oh, he was at a Passover, like, but that's impossible.
So just to have this straight, though, Seder is a retelling of the story of the Jews leaving slavery in Egypt and starting the journey to the Promised Land in Canaan.
Yes, okay. The Israelites, yes. When I visited Israel, when we were in the Old City, our tour guide pointed out a building and said, this is the building here where Christians believe that the Last Supper occurred, but this building wasn't built until the 700s. All of these like Renaissance paintings of the Last Supper or whatever, like that painting of the Last Supper is based on what the inside of that building looks like. But that building wasn't built until 700 years later.
Okay, so actually, I want to get back to that building in 1 second, but I want to go back to the thing about the Exodus from Egypt first.
Yeah.
Because that's such a specifically Jewish story and tradition. Like, it does feel disrespectful specifically to appropriate that story or to try to spin it into a Christian narrative.
But are Christians descendants of the Israelites?
Well, yes, if you ask them.
Like, no, is this a story about your ancestors' bid for freedom, or is this just something that you're celebrating because it's sort of tangentially related to Jesus? Like, that's where the difference is.
So but Christians are claiming a spiritual ancestry in those Israelites.
Like, is it because they followed Jesus and Jesus was a descendant of these people? Is that basically it?
Oh, no. No, it goes like so much deeper than that. Okay, so the Apostle Paul was a Jew. I mentioned him a while ago on this show.
Yeah.
On this episode. He was a Jew who worked for the Roman government. And then after Jesus' death, he was sent to go find and kill the people who had been followers of Jesus because the Roman government was trying to prevent insurrection. So Paul, being a Jew, he was kind of happy to go kill these Christians because to him they were blasphemous. But on his way to go find and kill some Christians, Paul had a paranormal religious experience where God spoke to him and told him to become a Christian. And then he became one of the most influential, probably the most influential Christian writer. And over half of the New Testament is his writing.
Wait, like half your book is written by a guy who killed a bunch of people on behalf of an imperial government?
Okay, so I double checked that. 28% of the content, over half of the individual books.
Suddenly David Hiles makes a ton more sense now.
Well, I mean, yeah, because like Jesus
killed a
knocked
bunch of people.
Yeah, but Jesus knocked him off a horse and changed his mind. Okay, I mean the difference here is that Paul goes on to live a provably good life and not murder any more people. So this is going to be a really simplified version. Okay, so here's the doctrine. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said grafted into the one root. So Paul compares Judaism to an olive tree, and Christianity is a branch off of a wild olive tree that's going to be grafted onto the established tree of Judaism. So in Paul's theology, all Christians are part of a sect of Judaism. When Jesus died, according to Paul, so the sacrifices in the temple, the tabernacle in the temple, were the theology is the sacrifices in the tabernacle in the temple were like to hold you over, like to keep things going, to keep sin like keep ahead of the snowball effect of sin not being atoned for until Jesus came. So Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. So this is where you get Christians talking about Jesus as the Lamb of God, because in Torah you see laws about there needs to be a male lamb 1 year old who has no spots or blemished, and that lamb is going to be sacrificed. So Jesus is the Lamb of God. So Jesus is the final sacrifice. Basically, the Christian theology is that all of that was done in the tabernacle and then done in the temple was to like just hold us all over until the ultimate sacrifice came, and that's Jesus. So when Jesus died, he abolished the ceremonial laws. So all of the laws that are related to that sacrificial, like temple laws, like all of that is abolished at the death of Jesus. And then the moral law is kept. So, like don't kill people, don't commit adultery, don't lie. Like that moral law is kept. But the ceremonial law is replaced with the new covenant. So remember, we talked about the Abrahamic covenant between Abraham and God. I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. So this is a new covenant brought about by Jesus' death that marries the new traditions of Christianity with those of Judaism. So in this doctrine that Paul put together in the book, you'd have to read the entire book of Romans to make it make any sense at all. In Paul's doctrine, Christians are essentially also Jews. And this is in conjunction with the Messianic prophecy. This is why Christian religious ceremonies and religious wording are so reminiscent of the ceremonies that we read about in the Old Testament. It's why churches have an altar. Like that's meant to represent the sacrificial altar in the temple. It's why we have priests, because priests represent the Levite priest who made the sacrifice on the altar in the temple. It's why we refer to Jesus as the Lamb of God. That theology about the temple and specifically the ceremonies about sacrifices, that's a foundational part of Christian theology. And that's why we hold on to the Old Testament. That's why we don't just take the New Testament and get out. Like that's our book. You all have your book. Like that's why we still have both. Okay, so this is why you're going to see Christians having that full-scale model of the tabernacle in Arkansas where like people dressed up as priests, and there's a full-scale model of the tabernacle that you can walk through.
Nuttiest stuff.
I've been there. It's actually really cool. Like it's
who do they get to play the priest? Is it just like
it's just like some random dude.
It's just some random dude. Is he clean shaven?
No, he's a beard.
Okay. As a descendant of the priests, I have to say my culture is not a costume.
Fair enough. Christians are taught, though, like that all of this stuff means something. Like the number of skins that are made to use to like make the walls of the tabernacle, and like the color that the skins are supposed to be dyed, and how many inches tall the seraphim on top of the altar of the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant are supposed to be. Like all of that is that. Remember we talked about biblical numerology? All of that stuff is supposed to mean something. So this is why Christians are attached to Judaism. Does that make more sense now?
Yes, but it also seems wrong. I feel like weirdly violated.
Okay, I think that's totally fair.
Bizarre.
Like I wouldn't blame you for feeling that way. But because Christians are taught, though, that they're grafted into Judaism. So I don't find it inappropriate if, for example, for Christians to believe that the number of skins that are dyed a certain color, or the number of inches high that the seraphim are off the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant, I don't have a problem with Christians believing that that means something, or believing that that is foundational, because that brings up the themes of sacrifice, or the themes of repentance, or the themes of redemption in my religion. Like, I don't think that is specifically appropriative for me to read Torah and then interpret it that way.
I mean, you'd be wrong. I mean, as
long as I'm
somebody's religion is wrong. Like,
oh no, you are perfectly allowed to sit there and say it's wrong. I don't think it's appropriative. I think it takes another step to become appropriative, and that's where we're going to talk about like people who do Seders and people, whether it's done traditionally or whether you're trying to sprinkle in Jesus. The thing is, though, that we as Christians have been taught that these Jewish traditions and laws and writings are foundational to our Christian religion. And then we've been taught that we are, by the Apostle Paul, that we are grafted in to the one. So it's one tree, one root. Judaism and Christianity share a root. It's just two branches of the same tree. That's the one true root theology. But being taught that we're grafted into the one true root, I think that's where people get a little more bold and start to want to take parts of Jewish culture and just make it a Christian thing. Like that's where you get people with I was going to say the chutzpah, but I think that's a bit appropriative, especially because I can't say chutzpah. I can't say it right. Chutzpah. I can't say it right.
No, if you can't say it,
see now I'm Mike Tyson.
I can't say it right. I can't say it right. You sound like Mike Tyson.
I literally just said that.
You know what? I mean, Sarah Palin said the chutzpah, which was
that's
fun. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The chutzpah.
That's where Christians think they can take the Seder and make it about Jesus, because they are functioning on that one true root theology, and they've got it in their heads that they are essentially Jews, so they think they can just steal a Jewish tradition and be like, make that about Jesus too.
So that's why they're always being like, how do you feel about Jesus? You're this close. How do you feel about Jesus? I could just get you to say he was all right, man. That's my in.
Right. So, but does that explain like why that line is so easy to cross for Christians?
Yes. And I'm so annoyed by it.
Okay. So the argument of, just to sew up the whole Apostle Paul thing.
Yeah.
The argument of, are Jews who follow Christ still Jews, or are they something else? And are Gentiles who follow Christ somehow Jewish? That argument takes up quite a bit of space in the New Testament. Paul is like, it might be interesting for you to read the book of Romans, because in the book of Romans is where Paul does most of his he lays out his argument like a lawyer. He says, well, if this, then that, and then if this, then that. And he's very cut and dried about how he says.
Have you ever read the Talmud?
No, but I imagine it's probably like conceptually kind of similar. So Paul's whole thing, though, of like, Jews are also Christians and Gentiles are also Jewish, like that whole thing, this is where Christians get the idea that certain parts of what we call Old Testament law are still to be followed. So very early in Christianity, Gentiles who were converted to Christianity to following Jesus were expected to go get circumcised and then also follow Torah. So they were expected to do all of it, you know, the no mixing fabrics and the dietary laws and all of that. But Paul argued that they were under no obligation to do that. So the modern idea, like I said, is that those parts of the law were fulfilled or abolished when Jesus died, and then parts of the law still apply. So it's basic logic for all Christians that we have to refrain from murdering, and not commit adultery, and not lie. Unless you're Dave Hiles. But like the 10 Commandments, that's clearly meant for everybody, including modern Christians. But Christians don't want to follow the dietary laws at all. So we've kind of decided as a group that that's part of what got abolished when Jesus died on the cross. And that we can also wear garments of mixed fabrics because, like, who cares? But Christians, especially stricter ones, like this is where they come in with the argument about like, well, tattoos, that might still be under the part of the law that we're supposed to follow because that's mentioned in Leviticus. Or like whether disobedient children can be killed by their parents or whether gay people should be stoned to death or not.
It's real pick and choose sort of thing. So like Paul's like, oh, people don't like this. I'm just going to get rid of it because it's inconvenient. Like that's how it reads to me.
I think a more modern explanation of the Apostle Paul. So people who are Christians that don't believe the Bible literally might say something more like, well, the Apostle Paul was trying to balance an unbalanceable equation, you know, because Paul truly believed in Jesus and he wanted Jews to convert and he also wanted Gentiles to convert. So Paul kind of made some weird reaches and stretches to try to bring both of these groups of people together because his faith in, like, he really believed in the whole Jesus thing. And he kind of went off the rails, like trying to get everybody into Jesus. So people who are not biblical literalists might have more of that kind of opinion.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm sorry that got way off topic, but I bring up the building where the Passover meal was or wasn't because it was actually mentioned in my dad's book, which is a bit of a mini tour guide to Jerusalem and includes his research on traditional sites, including like where the crucifixion was, where Jesus's tomb would have been, but also where Jesus' Passover meal would have been.
I mean, yeah, I think your dad being a scholar and a researcher of these things brings me to something that I want to say, because there is a difference between somebody who is taking a genuinely scholarly interest in what is undeniably a fascinating tradition, the history of that tradition, but like it's perfectly okay, like if you're a Christian, to find Judaism and Jewish traditions as a source of interest to you to look at, like to research and to learn about, as Sadie has done. However, what we're talking about here is like the problem of like fetishization and appropriation of Jewish traditions and appropriating them into some weird hybrid version with Christianity. Because like,
I mean, and I bring up my dad's book because I honestly do recommend it. It's called Where Was There, and it's available on Amazon. It's especially valuable for any Christians who do want to visit Jerusalem to see the holy sites there. It's well researched, and it's also written with a tone of respect for Muslims, for Jews, for Orthodox Christians. Like, all of us have to share these holy places. And it's written with a very practical tone of respect for that.
I mean, there is a lot of Christians out there who literally think as Judaism plus all of the bits about Jesus. Like, there are a lot of Christians out there who see Judaism as like the sort of goofy uncle who we have around for dinner sometimes, and he doesn't always think the way that we do, but he's still part of the family. Like, no, like these sorts of perspectives are like Judaism is not pre-Christianity. It is its own thing that is separate. And like they need to, like, people need to understand this.
No, these are two different world religions that share some commonalities. And like I said before, I don't know, this may kind of piss you off a little bit, and that's okay if it does, but I'm going to stand by Christianity being based in Jewish traditions, specifically when I speak about doctrines of redemption, because sacrificial redemption is a concept that's not exclusive to Christianity or Judaism or both. The idea that, you know, there is such thing as sin and that's paid for by a sacrifice, like that's universal. You can't just claim that for one religion. And I don't think it's appropriate for Christians to have what we call the Old Testament as a holy book when that's shared with another religion. You know, that's something that we need to share with mutual respect. Just like how Muslims and Christians and Jews all share certain holy places. These traditions have been built over thousands of years, and there isn't such thing as untangling these traditions at this point. You know, you can argue all day about whether it would have been correct for the first Christians 2,000 years ago not to have anything to do with the Old Testament and just have their own holy book. Well, you can argue all day about whether that would have been ideal or not. But the fact is that we live in 2020 and there's nothing that can be done about it now. So now we've just got to find a way to deal with the situation that does exist and figure out a way to coexist within that. I do definitely believe that it's a problem when you fetishize or appropriate someone else's culture. It would be inappropriate, just horrendously inappropriate, to observe Ramadan as a Christian, to just take that religious practice and change it, you know, make up a part about Jesus fasting in the wilderness and just make that a Christian thing. Because if you're a Christian, that's not your practice. That does not belong to you. So like you said, if you have the honor of being invited to somebody else's Seder or to participate in another cultural or religious tradition, I think people should absolutely do it. It's so valuable to learn about other people's beliefs, and it's a wonderful thing to be invited into somebody else's life. But as Christians, and speaking to people who are listening who are also Christians, we don't own Seder. We don't own mezuzahs. Like, those things don't belong to us. It's that they're not ours. There are things that are arguably appropriate, you know, like the first half of our holy book. You know, I don't see a problem with Christians singing psalms in church, But these things are so specifically, especially coming from a religion that is based off another religion. For goodness sake, haven't we already taken enough? Like those don't belong to you. It's inappropriate to take those things for our own, and it's twice as inappropriate to try to incorporate Jesus or messianic ideas into those things when that is specifically against Judaism, where those things originated.
That was very well put, and we have run very long. Make sure to check out the Patreon, because this is undoubtedly This is
the longest episode we have ever recorded.
Undoubtedly, you are hearing a version that is heavily edited and heavily trimmed down for broadcast. But if you subscribe to our Patreon, you can hear the whole thing.
You think that's it?
Yeah, I think that's it. That's where we're going to end it. Once again, this has been the Leaving Eden podcast. Thank you guys all for tuning in. You can find the Leaving Eden podcast on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. On Facebook and Instagram, it is Leaving Eden Podcast. On Twitter, it is at Leaving Eden Pod. You can join our Facebook group and you can join our Patreon. Those two things are going to be super fun. And if you want to find me on social media, you can follow me at GAVRIELHACOHEN. That is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Sadie, if you want to plug your social.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Sadie Carpenter Music and on Twitter at Hell Yeah Sadie.
And until next time, hope you guys have a nice day. Bye-bye.